I was surprised to see how few people, including myself by the way, have not been in an online health community yet. But let me rephrase the question. How many of you are involved in registries one way or another in your company or other ways? Please raise your hands to see. Well, that's a bit more at least. Yeah. That's good in this year. How many of you are participating not in a health online community, but any online community like Facebook or LinkedIn or aha, okay, I'm happy to see that at least. We have a very modern audience. So now we need, of course, the combination comes in. And the first question I have really, how do we make it happen? Because there are, of course, diseases where no registries are there yet. There are diseases like in Duchenne where there are already 54 either in effect or being planned. How do we make it happen that this one day will be a reality? What will be the 7-step model how to come to this future?
I was going to maybe answer that with a question to Nick as well, because us talking and thinking about the registries and online community was something that was new to me as well, because we really have to start thinking about this coming from the scientifically governed registry and looking at it from an industry perspective when we're looking at our post-marketing surveillance and we're doing partnerships. And one of the questions is, some of the data, and I couldn't see very well from here, but I was wondering whether a link wouldn't be, for instance, when we're doing a partnership in the US at the moment for one of our post-marketing surveillance, all the patients keep a diary. And I was just thinking, if you could link that in, rather than these paper format diary things, could that be, a link? 'Cause we have to start, we're not going to build something new, we're going to have to start thinking about how we link this together.
Yeah, so absolutely, and I'll try and answer both questions. On patients like me, I've been playing a lot with the system over the past 2 weeks, and it's very powerful. You can also start linking in things like, personal diaries, information, etc. And you also have online fora where you can actually exchange information, And to answer your question, Hans, I think it's all about getting in there and actually starting to do it. Because what I'm seeing online is that there's a hell of a load of tools out there, really powerful ones, and it's just about starting to use them because the tools are changing on a day-to-day basis. And what we're seeing, and I can tell you this from a patient advocacy perspective, is that the power relationship is significantly turning now towards the patients, thanks a lot to social media. Some of our patients have got PhDs in biochemistry, have got their own biotech companies, are incredibly smart, okay? But also, they live with the disease on a day-to-day basis. And now that they have these tools to really start gathering information, they are coming to see their GPs, but also industry, knowing their disease, really, they're not kind of... they're going to know it better than actually, everybody else does. And that's why I think these tools are so important. But the other thing that we saw is that to make a registry or any of this work, it's all about the quality of the data. And one of the key problems you get in all registries, and we see this with our registries, is about time. The clinicians often don't have the time to keep them updated and everything. Patients do. And now the patients have a motivation to keep these updated on a daily basis. And what we saw this morning, which I thought was fantastic, was evidence that data from parents was really robust. That really stuck out. And so what that shows is that from patients and parents, it's very robust evidence. So I think we can really start to trust the data that will be in these systems.
Charlie, I was looking for you. When is Charlie going to ask a question? By the way, you are competing about a Toblerone. Yeah, I know. You and you. It's really between the two of you. Charlie, go ahead.
Just had a quick question for Nick. I know the purpose of the registry was not to assist clinical trials, but you did mention that you're working with SOBI, and you probably have the largest sarcoptenuria registry in the world, obviously. When they went in there and started looking at that, can you say whether there's anything they found that they felt was helpful to the trial or from the endpoint standpoint or any other aspect of that they felt could be practically used in designing a clinical trial?
Sure. So I can't really speak for them, because we speak from the AKU Society, but from my understanding of some of the useful information that we brought and why we've now developed this partnership, was that we now have a very good understanding of the natural history of AKU. AKU is it's quite a difficult disease to study because clinical symptoms only start in the 20s and 30s, and it might take 10, 20, 30 years to really start becoming very serious, even though they're subclinical before then. But we developed a composite endpoint, which we funded with Liverpool University and Hospital, We then did a natural history study, and that was the start of our registry. And that composite endpoint allowed us to which was then validated, which is now validating for a Delphi study, and that allowed us to characterize all the different elements of AKU in the kind of individual patient. And when we brought that to the table in discussions with SOBI, I think they were impressed by how, through the development of this registry and this composite endpoint and this natural history study, we now have a very good understanding of the disease, but also we now have an endpoint that we could use in a clinical trial.
There's a question in the far end there, in the back, Matthew.
Oh, sorry.
Would you like to say something as well,
No, he
Samantha?
just keeps handing me the mic.
Okay.
Oh, I'll try to catch up with Charlie. One statement and then one question. My statement is essentially the Patients Like Me platform, again, emerged similar to your story out of the man who developed it, Jamie Haywood. His brother had ALS. His brother was progressively dying. And as an MIT engineer, he simply thought, why don't I find a way to track my brother's death? Maybe it will help someone else. So we're seeing innovation produced out of necessity, because for some reason, on a regulatory basis, pharma has not been able to properly address patient needs. And patients really are needy. When I had my series of tumors, it took me 7 years to find overall the surgical team where I finally had the surgery done in Germany, but that was a long trip. So my question is, what do both of you or anyone else who's doing or involved in a patient community, what's the choke point now? If pharma can get involved or if NIH can get involved, what is the remaining choke point to get more activity going, to get more involvement, to get more robustness, but I hate that word, but to get more robustness around these online communities / patient-driven registries?
There is an answer from the audience as well, unless you want to go first. Sharon?
So the choke point now that I see is a new kind of competition that is emerging between advocacy organizations, these small companies like Patients Like Me and some others, where there's a desire to make yet another one, no matter what they are, and it's happening in the online space as well. So I actually believe that advocacy as we know it, brick and mortar advocacy, is going to go away. We're not going to have the kind of structures we've had up till now, and that we will see an emergence of many, many online communities, but they will not converge very well. And that even, I know Jamie Haywood, I love Jamie Haywood, but he's got a commercial model because he's actually selling the data to pharmaceutical companies and isn't ready yet to open that up so that it interfaces with other things like, Kyle's work, et cetera. So I think we're seeing a new kind of competition, and the choke point will be what will trip us, a la the talk I gave yesterday, to become boundaryless, because that's the only way we're going to get this done.
I maybe want to add to that, because I think the ideas have been around. I've had the great privilege to work with Professor Tanner for a number of years, and he's a man with ideas. So we've been talking about this for a number of years. I think some of it's resources and time. The ideas are there, but it's actually, from my perspective, we're working industry, but with a group of clinicians and busy clinicians. And we're trying to get the time to move this forward. And I shouldn't be saying this today, but some of the problems are technical as well. And actually just getting, technically, these databases to be able to link and share the data. So that's some of the things that we're coming across from my personal perspective.
I think...
Otherwise, we have a comment from the
I
audience.
just wanted to add a few things on the choke points. I mean, I completely agree with what Sharon was saying. It took us a long time, actually, before we decided who we went with to do this, because there are a lot out there. And what you don't want to start happening, particularly when you're an organisation like ours, is start having all these multiple things everywhere. And then the patients don't really know, and they're all scattered. You don't have many patients, and they're all on these different things, and they're not talking to each other. So for us, that's very important, actually. You kind of choose one, and you really try and stick with it. But the second thing, I think, which we're going to see is actually trying to get as many patients as possible and keeping them on there. You know, because if you go onto a lot of these kind of online communities, the Facebook ones are just so busy, you know, that's great. But one of the problems you get is quite high attrition, you know, so as patients get better or whatever, they don't report as often, or as they get worse, they don't report and stuff. So there's going to be a lot for us to learn. It's not just the technical solution, it's how you actually motivate your patients, how you keep them involved, and how you make sure that, you know, also they know how to use the system.
We have a question from Wieske Kingma, gentleman.
Yeah, I just had a quick, perhaps more remark with regards to technology. There are many solutions out there, but with regards to terminology, medical terminology and translation, that's a big one. If you think about global registries and trying to make sure that you can collect the data in the same way. From the safety perspective, there's a 35,000 term MedRA dictionary that translates into numbers which are translated automatically into many different languages, which is something that you may be able to look at so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, because that's already been translated by government agencies. It's free to use, and that may be a way to harmonize data collection.
Interesting comment indeed. There was a question here in the front as well.
Repko de Vru, Steering Committee Orphan Drugs, again. Has there ever been any idea on using things like Linux and WordPress, which are like everyone builds on the same system and we start improving it, so we can start somewhere and then continue it and improve it, and like, you know, like what you're saying, well, we need to link things. This is really an out-of-the-box, naive remark from my side. But every now and then, maybe a remark like this will help or may help.
Yeah, so on WordPress, the kind of whole blogging stuff, you know, we've used that quite a lot. Or kind of trying to create a wiki. I know there was a group I met at the Eurodis conference in Amsterdam who did some really good stuff. I think it was Marshall Smith, I can't remember, but some really good stuff using a wiki structure, you know, and that's great. And that's great, it's kind of a repository of information, you know. It's more kind of qualitative, but also very important. I think the importance there, particularly when the advocacy group does it, is that it comes with a certain amount of confidence in the information that's on there, particularly for patients, you know. So there have been experiments with that, but I think the advantage of these kind of newer forms of data-driven ones is that it really is hard, quantitative data that the patient can have, but also they can then compare to the rest of the community.
We have also a question from there. Now, well, they really make you run from one side to the other, Matthew, but... By the way, the next presentation will be further building on this topic as well, more from an operational perspective. So.
Yeah, can I ask what your views on in your communities is in regards to privacy? Because working in industry and working for industry, privacy is an incredibly sensitive issue, and I saw that the common data set which is being used over in the US, some of that wouldn't be allowed here. For example, ethnicity, you can't collect that information on ethnicity in France, for example. It's just completely outlawed. It's just a no-no. And yet that's one of the required elements of the common data set over in the US. And also city. When you're dealing with rare diseases, if you identify a city, you can potentially identify who that person is. Now, those kind of issues are blocks to particularly pharma companies and also registries conducted particularly by medical societies in terms of what they can have on and going through ethics committees in getting these approved. So I was just wondering how you get around those kind of issues, because those are the kind of issues that really they're not scientific issues, but they're ethical issues which can completely flummox some of these schemes.
And very, very important questions. I'll give a perspective which it doesn't include the online community, but it's an academic registry in which we have been a strong partner. We're a partner and not only on the advisory committee, but also on the steering committee. So we're very present in there. And it wasn't our original intention to do post-marketing surveillance with this group, but it's something that's now come up because we think this just makes sense. This is the way forward. And so I gave a presentation to the different advocacy groups, about what our intention was, and there was exactly the same questions that came back about privacy, exactly those questions that you've asked. So what we do is we reconsent. So you have an ethical approval in each country or each region for your academic registry, and then you're piggybacking some questions on post-marketing surveillance for your drug data onto that bigger registry. And for those data elements, you're reconsenting the patients that are entering into that part of the registry. Yeah, but I mean, it's actually, when I first thought about that, it was like, but you have, from a patient perspective, I think it's absolutely necessary.
Sharon, again?
And just so it's clear that it's also true in the US, there are certain identifiers that are you're not able to share. They're collected, but then the data is de-identified. Vanessa commented on that when it's used. And so there are a couple of different systems, some which include a kind of reconsenting also in the US. There's also another project that we've been working on called Private Access. So you can look at privateaccess.com, and we've written code, about 400,000 lines of code that actually allows individuals to decide how much information they're going to share. Because in the US, individuals can make a decision to share whatever they wish. Jamie Haywood is famous for saying that it is the moral responsibility of every person on the planet to share absolutely everything. When he said that at our conference, we asked if he would share his social security number in public, and he said no. But I do get, he is at one end of the continuum, and then there are people all the way at the other end of the continuum who don't want to share anything. And then I think we need to see ways to give all those people the ability to share what they wish to share when they want to share it, and at the same time preserve the academic and kind of industry models that allow de-identified information to be shared. Although DNA can be the ultimate identifier, and so we may come to a point in society where we say most data sets can be re-identified.
Okay, thanks. Last comment by you, Nick?
Yeah, just to say something on the privacy, because we spent a lot of time thinking about that, and we work with a legal firm called Hogan Lovells, who've been advising us, because you're right, the privacy laws are very different. You know, data protection in the UK, in Europe, in the US, very different, and sometimes they just don't really speak to each other, and so that's really important. But what we did realize, however, is that we didn't want any of this privacy to get in the way of what the patients really need. You know, and when we speak to our patients, you know, they are, as Sharon says, quite divergent views on privacy. And just to finish, there was some very interesting sociological research that showed that privacy is much more serious topic for healthy people than for patients. Okay, the majority of patients, when it comes to privacy, they don't want it to get in the way of it getting a treatment. Now, you could say that's because they're vulnerable, and they shouldn't be exploited. They're vulnerable. But I do think there is a point there. You know,
that's a very good point. Yeah. Very good point. Last comment,
Just a very, very last comment on the data, because I think that this group needs to be aware, I think a lot of people probably are, but the data protection legislation is currently under review, and next year this is going to be a major issue. Nothing to do with rare diseases, but it will affect the way that we can share data in Europe, and I think this is something that we need to remain aware of.
Thanks for those comments. And again, a big hand for our panel and an excellent presentation.